I think overall mobile phones are positive in schools if they're used correctly and used with restriction, because you can use them for research in classes. And they're also, I think they're definitely required for health and safety, calling home.
I'm someone who didn't have a laptop that I brought into school until very recently. And genuinely, it's changed my school day so much, especially when you're transitioning from online school that we were doing for the past 2 months. I definitely would promote bringing in your laptop to school. It saved me.
Hello, and welcome to the Kingston Grammar School podcast. Throughout this podcast, we will be speaking with faculty and students alike about important topics surrounding the Kingston Grammar School, or KGS, community. I am your host, Shannon Vandermark, and whether you are a present or future parent or student, or simply interested in KGS, you are very welcome. For any listeners new to Kingston Grammar School, KGS is an independent, co-educational day school located in Kingston upon Thames, England. Officially founded in 1561, the school can trace its roots back to at least the 13th century. KGS is one of the most successful co-educational schools in the country. Inspirational teaching and a deep commitment to pastoral care means that students grow in confidence and understanding, and individual talents and creativity are able to flourish. In this episode, we are talking about personal devices such as laptops, tablets, and mobile phones in the classroom and on school grounds, and why KGS sees these one-on-one devices as tools, not toys. We discuss the policies and ethos surrounding personal devices at KGS, including their AUP, or Acceptable Use Policy. KGS currently supports a controlled use approach to devices as opposed to a full-on ban. This approach is being constantly monitored and evaluated and will evolve in time with technological advances, but for now, it is working very successfully for faculty and students. My guests today include Headmaster Stephen Lehek, Deputy Head Pastoral Sarah Humphrey, and Deputy Head Academic Will Cooper. Because the schools have only recently opened their doors again, we are currently conducting these recordings over Zoom until the government allows guests back into schools. We are all so very used to Zoom and other video conferencing software that actually being able to chat in person with my guests will probably take some getting used to. My first guest was Deputy Head Pastoral Sarah Humphrey. Sarah oversees the pastoral care and is the designated safeguarding lead at KGS. Also a geography teacher with a very keen travel bug, Sarah has been with Kingston Grammar School for 13 years. Hello,
Okay.
Sarah.
Hi. Hello.
How are you doing on this end of week day?
Well, it's Friday, so that's always really positive, but it's been really good. Having all the children back has been really lovely.
Oh, excellent. Thank you for sitting down and talking to me about devices in the classrooms. And when I say devices, how do you define devices? I know you use the term one-on-one.
That's a really interesting one. And even just your phrase devices in the classroom is really needs unpicking a bit, because there are times when students use devices, electronic devices in their classroom for their academic learning. And then there's also devices that they use outside the academic classroom for other areas of school life. And devices is another huge word that needs unpacking, because some students now are bringing in proper laptops, which is excellent. And then some students are using their mobile phones. Many of our year sevens have got smartphones for the first time. So just that phrase, devices in the classroom, there's a lot in there, and there's a lot of different strands that go on in school life. You could talk about for hours.
Okay, well, for the purposes of our limited amount of time, can you just explain to me the KGS policy and kind of ethos surrounding personal devices?
Yes, we've always said that just having an outright ban on mobile phones in particular is just not going to train young people in how to use them responsibly, and it won't train them in how they can integrate them into their life. So we've always been of the mindset that they can bring their smartphones to school, and many parents want them to do that for safety and security. We are a school that's on a split site, so at least one year group a day goes down to our sports grounds 3 miles away. So parents like to know that they've got their smartphones with them.
Right.
So we allow them to come to school, but under very, very strict guidance that the children have to agree to, and they can only get their network access if they look at what's called our AUP, our Acceptable Use Policy. And that just goes through all the things that we will and won't allow in school. So we do allow students to keep their phones on them during the day. We do allow them to access things during the day. Many areas of school life are online. So if they want to find out when their next sports practice is, they would find that online. If they want to find out what their geography homework is, that's posted online. So it's a very integral part of school life. But we're not going to say you have free reign to post some social media or do your online shopping or all that kind of thing. So there are very clear rules and regulations about the use of technology in school. We feel that that is a much better way to prepare young people for the world outside of KGS, rather than saying on arrival, you need to hand them all in. And that's just a particular philosophy that we have.
I guess the more you say something is categorically not allowed, the more it's coveted and hidden, and then it becomes complicated to work around all of that. Can you talk a little bit about age appropriateness, and when would you suggest introducing children to phones?
That's a really interesting one, because the head gets asked that question all the time when we see our incoming Year 7 students. We'll run an event for parents. These are students that are in their Year 6s at their current schools. And one of the big questions will be, do they need a phone? Is now the time to buy a phone? So it would appear that a lot of parents wait for their sons and daughters to leave their primary or prep schools, and when they come to big school, as they call it, they'll give them a phone. Now, that's a parental choice, and the head is very clear with parents. We don't say you need a phone, and he does make the point that you can just have what we call the brick phone that doesn't have internet access. There is no requirement for students to have a smartphone, because all those applications that I talked about, looking for their sports practices or looking for their homework, they can find those on devices that we can lend them in the library. They're internet-based services, so you don't need a smartphone. We can set you up to do that alternatively. But a lot of parents use the move to secondary school to get a smartphone. And I absolutely understand that. That's part of the move to senior school. So then the next conversation we need to have with parents is that when they are now coming to secondary school, there's this whole drive to have loads and loads of different apps, WhatsApp and Instagram and all these other kind of applications. But there are actually age limits. And one of the really interesting things I find is that a lot of parents are not actually aware of that. So there's the education of the students, which we do in school, but there's also that information that parents need, because parents have a lot to deal with in the move to secondary school. And suddenly I think they give them their smartphone, and lots of parents are happy with them downloading all these applications that they hear about all the time. But actually, there are very strict rules on, you shouldn't have WhatsApp till certain ages and Instagram. So we have to work with parents and train them on that.
Just a note about age restrictions within apps in the UK. It's not entirely obvious, but for many social media apps such as TikTok, Instagram, Snapchat, or Facebook, users must be at least 13 years old. But did you know that users must be at least 16 to use WhatsApp, 17 years old for Twitter, and that players of the Call of Duty mobile game must be 18 or older? Sarah, you touched upon student training in school. Can you speak a bit more about that?
We do this all the time. They have dedicated IT lessons. So when they come to the school, we start with, this is how you log onto the computer. This is what the intranet system at school looks like. We have to talk to them about the filter. So obviously all schools have an internet filter. So you have to make sure that students are safe in what they're accessing using our Wi-Fi. We talk to them about that. And then we will move through looking at security settings with them, because most children will get their smartphone and they won't realize all the complicated and sophisticated ways that they can protect themselves online. So we go through that with them, and we get them to look at their security settings on some of their profiles and some of the things they use to make sure they understand that they don't need to be on open access to everybody. And that's part of that online safety training that starts with Year 7s. And then as we go through the school, every year group has a different piece of online safety training, which is age relevant for them. So if you go to the lower 6, for example, we will be in pastoral education there, teaching them about their digital footprint and what they have online. And they might post about their life at 16. Potential future employers might well look at that. So we teach and talk to the lower six about that kind of thing. So that's not age appropriate, particularly for year sevens, but for the lower six, they need to know that universities, potential employers will search for them online, and what is their digital footprint can have an impact later on. So we talk about that with them. So every year has a very age-specific form of pastoral education about online safety.
Just going back to the parents, and that's also available to parents as well, giving them regular updates because things are changing.
Yeah, we did one last term. Our head of academic IT and our head of pastoral education actually hosted an online training session for parents. And pre-COVID, we'd have had all those parents come in. We have a theatre that holds 200 people. So actually, we're limited on numbers. What was amazing now about doing it online was we ran a parents' information session about online safety. Because it was online, we had at one point 700 sets of parents who were able to access that talk, and we made it available to one of our partner schools that we work with in Kingston. So actually their parents came online. So what an efficient way of running that. Far more parents were able to access it, and they were able to submit questions before and during the session, and we were able to in live time address some of their concerns and questions. So training of parents is really powerful as well.
Can you tell me a little bit about the controlled use policies in place you were touching on?
When they get into second and third year, we want them to start taking more responsibility for things, not getting mum and dad to do all their admin for them. So we've now tried this where we give them what's called 5-minute mobile time. So they go to their tutor period, we register them, and then they have 5 minutes, and it's very directed. They have to have their phones on the table. They do it by themselves. They check their timetables, their homework log on Firefly, they check their sports practices, they do all their own administration and get themselves set up for the day. And then we make them put them away. And then we do our pastoral tutor time chatting activities that we do. And we found that's really effective because they know it's coming. We are being respectful of the fact that they need to have that time to organise their day. We give them a dedicated time, and then we shut it down and actually say to them, you're not going to spend 20 minutes on your phone not talking to anybody. So sort of segmenting that pastoral time has been really effective. I think that's something we'll look to roll out throughout the rest of the school.
It's interesting because to me, that sounds like a great habit to get into for people of all ages.
Yeah. We actually only need to be connected at very key points. I worry that some students are constantly online with this barrage of information. They do need to be able to sit and read a book quietly, or actually just talk to the person next to them uninterrupted without a screen for 10 minutes. And that's a skill that we need to be teaching children as well.
Because I suppose your concern is that the students are just receptors and they're not actively living. My last questions are just about parental concerns over screen time. Shouldn't screen time be reduced at school?
This is a huge area of where we are at the moment. It's just reassuring parents that this is not the start of lessons becoming in an individual silo where children just sit in front of a screen and everything is delivered electronically. There is absolutely a place still for teacher delivery. There is absolutely a place for children to talk. So the key skills are still there. Yep. It's just a slightly different way of doing it. And I think parents need to just be reassured that the actual basis of education is going to stay the same.
Right. Because I guess the whole point at the end of the day is to prepare students with key skills for life after school. Well, thank you so much, Sarah. This has been a really useful chat and I appreciate your time.
It's an absolute pleasure.
Okay, take care. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think in the world now where our resources are split online and in person because we had the period of online learning, it's quite useful just to have a device of sorts to sort of bridge that gap between the two resources so everything can be accessed. If you don't have a laptop, I think a phone is very important.
Social media is just one part of having a phone. There's all the different aspects as well that can be really compatible with the classroom. So, organising schedules and tasks and even doing small research for small research projects. I've definitely experienced that in my lessons when we've been given a task that involves looking something up that is sort of off the curriculum in that sense. It is really helpful to have a phone there to do that on.
Next, I was joined by Headmaster Stephen Lehek. Headmaster of KGS since 2014, Stephen's teaching experience includes history, English, politics, and classics, and alongside teaching, he has coached football, cricket, and rugby. As one of the busiest people in education, I was really grateful for Stephen to share with me some of his time. Good morning, Stephen.
Good morning. Hi.
Hi, thanks for sitting down with me over Zoom again for a chat.
Not at all. Always fun.
So today we are discussing tools, not toys, in regards to personal electronic devices in the classroom and on school grounds, I suppose. So I thought a good place to start was just broadly covering the KGS policy and ethos surrounding personal devices and the AUP.
In terms of AUPs, Acceptable User Policy, Process, Procedures, it's about common sense to a larger degree. It's like anything else you do in life. You know what's right and what's wrong. You know, you are polite, you're communicative, you use things in the right way. You don't insult or look at things you shouldn't be looking at or do things you shouldn't be doing. So an acceptable user policy around mobile phones and computers and laptops, it's a tool, and a tool can sometimes be a bit of fun, but it's not a toy and it shouldn't be a weapon.
What do you think the damage would be if you had a full-on ban?
Mobile phones are a symptom of the problem, not the problem. So actually, if you ban mobile phones as a school, and of course, for some schools, that's right. So I don't want to say that our policy is the right policy for every school. You know, for some schools, they absolutely need to say, we've got other things to deal with. We don't need this additional burden, or actually we have had a particular problem in our school. Every business is different. Every hospital is different. Every operation is different. Every school is different. Every student is different.
Yep.
We have commonality, but we fear that in our school, where mobile phones can be a problem, but more of a symptom than a cause, that actually, if you say mobile phones aren't allowed or you hand them in, students typically, as we've heard from other schools, would bring more than one device to school. They'll have the one they hand in and the one they use.
Right.
They'll have the laptop in the classroom, but the mobile phone in the bathroom. And we've seen evidence of students, you know, doing things using mobile technology in ways they shouldn't, away from the gaze of teachers and parents. So you kind of drive it underground is what I'm saying. Mm-hmm. And rather than drive it underground, we'd rather educate. If I can use a classic example that I use with parents and with students, we've always said, look, crossing the road is a potentially dangerous thing because you could get knocked down. But it's a potentially useful thing to do because the shop or the place you want to go to is on the other side of the road.
Yeah.
So what do? We teach you to do it safely. We look for good signals. We look for pelican crossings. We look for zebras. We look for bollards. We look for ways of doing it safely. Mm-hmm. And if none of those things are available, we say, look left, look right, look left again. You know, we do the green cross code. You know, we listen, we look, you know, and the parents train their children to do that. They hold their hand whilst doing it, you know, literally. Mm-hmm. And I think we figuratively have to do the same thing with mobile technology to say, here are the safety zones. It's a useful thing to do. It's a good thing to do, but actually you need to do it safely. And I will hold your hand while I'm doing it. If a child goes to cross the road unsafely, you pull them back. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing with a mobile phone. They do something you shouldn't be doing. They're maybe a website or giving away their email address or saying something you pull them back. And it's a metaphorical kind of crossing of the road that there's some great reasons for doing it, but you need to be able to do it safely.
One would argue that it's an absolute necessity to cross the street.
Totally. And in this day and age, can you imagine someone going into the workplace and saying, I don't have a mobile phone and I can't use it?
That's really the point, isn't it? I mean, you are preparing your students for living in the world and not just living in Kingston, but living anywhere. And so what is the general public doing everywhere?
Exactly.
What do you predict the technological future will look like for KGS? I know you're in the midst of a changeover from hard copy textbooks, for example.
I think the key thing is to quickly realize and understand as a parent, as a teacher, as a student, that you cannot divorce technology from education. Mm-hmm. It is ubiquitous. And sometimes you'll pick up a pen, a pencil, a piece of paper, because that's the most convenient tool to use. Other times it might be a phone, it might be a laptop, it might be a tablet. And there will be a lot of integration of technology, and, you know, exams will eventually go online. A lot of exams might be as well slightly more adaptive to give students comfort through the process. So you're not having a good day on the exam, we'll take you down this route of questions. You're having a great day on the exam, we'll take you down that route of questions. So actually it will begin to separate students' grades in terms of how they answer the questions and what they know. So everybody has a better mental health experience throughout the process of exams.
Right.
So I think it'll become an integral part. And of course, we've got iWatches and we've got, we have Google Glasses. And so there's going to be loads of different tech. So schools won't be able to ban tech because A, they're delivering tech. They're encouraging students to use iPads, tablets, etc. But phones are not very dissimilar now from a tablet.
No.
in terms of size and ability. And students will be wearing Google Glasses and iWatches and other similar devices. Wearable technology is going to come more and more to the fore. So it's going to be more of a kind of a, how do we educate? How do we monitor? How do we continue to keep everyone in the loop and keep children safe? Let me look at two ends of the spectrum here. There's a really good bit of work to be done by schools to introduce things like esports and gaming curriculums to say, because this is a big part of what people's lives are, actually, we need to make sure we encourage that rather than divorce ourselves from it. So esports is the fastest growing industry in the world.
Right.
So we need to make sure we're encouraging people to be able to participate in that in the right way and actually have great careers in that area. But equally, at the other end of the spectrum, we need to make sure that we are protecting students from the slightly more nefarious elements of what can occur online and make sure that we are educating everybody to protect them. It's not a free-for-all. It's not an acceptance of the negativity. It's about an education of the positive use of technology and saying that we're not going to shy away from the big issues.
I do think it's a strong policy and it makes sense to me. And from the students I've spoken with, I think they feel respected when you trust them to make the right decisions. And then they start looking around, looking out for the younger ones and noticing pretty quickly what the problematic behavior is.
Absolutely. And I think although there are a few exceptions, and exceptions will always occur, if you speak to the majority of first and second years, they're still finding their way with use of technology and what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, and how it can impact on friendships and engagement. And some of them are on their phones a bit too much or do some things they shouldn't be doing. But if you speak to the majority of the 16 to 18 year olds, particularly sixth form, they'll say, we've been through that and now we have a sensible use and a knowledge of what we should and shouldn't be doing. And nobody comes to me and says, oh, I didn't know I shouldn't do that on WhatsApp. I didn't know I shouldn't say that. They all say, yeah, I really did know. I knew that I had to look after my digital footprint, that I shouldn't be abusive. People know, and there's no sense of shying away from some pretty difficult stuff.
Well, thank you, Stephen. We could talk more about all of this, I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it.
It's really lovely to speak to you again. Okay.
Likewise. See you for the next one.
See you soon. Take care.
Okay.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
I have my timetable on my phone. I rely on that, definitely. We used to have paper copies, but it's a lot more of a hassle getting out with your bag and things like that. And then in lessons, teachers sometimes do quizzes, which is a lot more interactive if you can go on like a Kahoot quiz, for example. You can use your phones to all compete, and it's another way of learning. It's sort of a competition against your classmates. We use OneNote quite a lot, Microsoft OneNote, and it's really great because teachers can write directly onto OneNote in their lessons. And then if you need to go back to it later, say you missed something because they were writing really fast, then you can go back to it and catch up on what you've missed. Or sometimes they'll put worksheets on there so you can print them out at home or just do it virtually. So that can be really helpful. OneNote is definitely something that I've loved doing online.
Finally, I sat down with Deputy Head Academic Will Cooper. Responsible for overseeing academic provision, Will teaches religion and philosophy and has been at KGS for 5 years. Will has written a number of articles for The Guardian Education and for The Times Education and has been published in academic periodicals. Hi, Will.
Hi, Shannon. How are you?
Good, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to sit down with me today.
No, not at all.
As Deputy Head Academic, can you just tell me a bit about what you look after mainly?
So the kind of main thing I look after is the curriculum. So what we teach and then the staffing, the people who teach it. So that's a sort of two bits. So if there's any kind of major curriculum reform, there's always little tweaks around the edges, developing a curriculum, but then it's also looking at how that's delivered.
I was hoping you could talk to me a bit about tools, not toys. And is that a catchphrase?
I guess it's like a Swiss Army knife. We probably stole it somewhere from there, that, this concept that it just has 1,000,001 uses and let's just focus on the productive stuff.
And actually, there is some usefulness of technology in school. How has technology actually helped the school day?
I think the main thing about any of this technology, it's not just a collection of plastic, metal and electrical components. It connects people. And I think a lot of our thinking behind our introduction to one-to-one, which we had been quite cautious about, I freely admit, is that actually our perception of it has quite radically shifted over this last year of pandemic and just seeing just how powerful it can be as a connection tool. And so we talk about, in terms of our sort of academic ethos, that's my sort of focus as the academic deputy, really sort of talk about the importance of communication, but also of collaboration and all the educational evidence that would go behind the importance of working together. And actually, That's what these devices do. That's what they've been most useful in doing, is actually connecting people, not just to other resources, but connecting them to each other. So that homework in particular, it's not that kind of solitary experience that we all sort of went through when you've got kids who are now all working together on the same document at the same time. They're seeing each other, they're talking to each other. It's just transformational. And actually their levels of engagement skyrocketed because they're working together, and it's a really productive experience.
So that's really interesting, because I think probably the fear of employers is that children are becoming really isolated with their mobile devices. But actually, it sounds like you are able to prepare students for a more collaborative working experience in the future.
Absolutely. As you say, in industry, there's a lot of discussion about trying to get people to come back into offices because they're concerned that the creativity drops because you're not sparking off each other. But actually, we're kind of seeing the opposite with homework, that suddenly it has gone from something where you might be looking at your exercise book, or you might have just been looking at a screen just with your work on it. But now, actually, what's increasingly happening is you are joining up with other groups of students. And because of the platforms we're now using, this is in a school-based environment. So it's not the kind of concerns that we might have about using social media sites or video sites to join up with each other. They're actually using our platforms that we have control over. And that gives us and hopefully parents a greater degree of reassurance about how this is working.
Tell me a bit about preparing creators over just end users.
Yeah, so that kind of phrase of being a creator, not a consumer, that sort of really goes into what we call our STEAM agenda. So schools talk about STEM, the science, technology, engineering and maths, but the arts part really sort of re-emphasizes that creativity. I think it's this kind of term that I think initially sort of picked up from the States, but is now sort of has real currency in the UK. And that's not just about, there's the creativity of making a technology project kind of, visually, aesthetically appealing. It is actually about that problem solving that comes with creativity. And you can see it in all subjects. You can be just as creative in mathematics as you can in an art or DT lab. But we particularly see it within our computing curriculum, where students are using a whole range of different apps and platforms, and they're using those as end consumers. But then what they're then able to do is to understand, well, how was that actually produced? And that's not just looking at the functionality of coding. It's about saying, okay, how can I make this better? And I think if there's anything that we want to do in our educational ethos, it's to train them to do that in whatever sphere they're working, is to take something existing and say, okay, now how can I improve it? And you need to use the technology first in order to be able to then to actually think about how you're going to move it on to the next step.
Right. So there's little concern over controlling how much the students are, say, gaming or using their mobile devices, but more understanding what they're interested in and how they're using these things.
Absolutely. Yeah. There's a couple of things about the behaviors we look at, and I don't want to use lazy gender stereotypes. But we've seen the evidence that there is a tendency for girls to be sort of more kind of fixated on social media platforms, which we don't allow in schools. So that's an absolute no. You cannot look at social media. But we also see particularly groups of boys who might be using their phones for gaming. And you're absolutely right. We say, if you put your phone away, what are you then going to do? Now, the gaming is a really interesting one. And one of the interesting bits of data that came out over lockdown is that actually boys' mental health had seen signs of improvement because they were socializing on gaming platforms, whereas there was a deterioration in girls' mental health with a greater tendency to focus on social media. Now, as I said, that's not a gender thing. It's actually what they're doing. There are plenty of girls that game and plenty of boys that use social media. And so what we're trying to do is to really think carefully about gaming and the perception of gaming, because there is a genuine concern about addiction and that it can really detract them when they're at home from actually focusing on schoolwork. But there are also so many positives to gaming that does make it a really sort of social aspect. And one of the things that then has been picked up on both in universities and in schools over the last 2 to 3 years is this development of esports. The gaming industry is a massive industry, but around that are not just the people who play the games, but those who promote and support and those who are going to get involved in the technical side. So I think our answer that we're working towards put my phone away and do what, is actually going to be, well, go and join the esports club, because that's actually a forum that we can control and actually develop not just gaming skills. And there are some really sort of interesting pedagogical things that go along with that in terms of you watch people playing games and they problem solve. If they can't do it through one route, they do it through another. And also that kind of stickability, that's the sort of phrase we use in teaching now, is how do we get someone to really stick at it and keep ploughing away until they find a solution? If you watch someone gaming, they will not stop until they get to the next level.
Yeah.
We want to take all the positives of that approach to gaming and use it in education more widely, but also to actually look at gaming through esports and actually promote that in a different way. So that may be slightly shocking to some parents who just think, gaming is pure evil, but actually there are so many benefits if you can do it in a controlled way. And I think that's what we're trying to work towards.
I know that it's still very early days for the esports foundation in schools, but can you tell me a little bit about what that will entail?
There is an esports foundation, about 100 schools signed up to it. Schools have an esports team and they train, and they don't just train by playing the game. They actually do other things. Part of the program is to have a fitness program connected with it. So that happens with us anyway, because most of our students will probably be doing sport probably at least 4 days a week. So we're not losing out on the physical side of health and fitness. An esports team is as competitive as our hockey and rowing teams, our football teams, all of those kind of things. They train and they support each other and they come up with tactics, and then they compete against other schools. And for millions of kids around the country, that's what they're really into, and actually having a format where they can compete to the highest level, and the top gamers are winning the same prize money as a Wimbledon tennis winner. So, it's you can see why they're getting into it, and because the rewards are there. So as long as you can tag on, or as long as you can absolutely embed the fact that they are also getting physical fitness and recreation, and also being able to balance their time with everything else, actually, there are so many things that we want to sort of embrace about gaming, again, to do it in a positive way that we have some control over.
Do you think generally students who want to play football will still play football, or do you think students are looking for reasons to not be physically active? I know it's a big concern for parents. Is that a real thing?
We haven't seen that at all. I think what sort of tend to see is when students come into the school in the first year, for some, although it's a small minority now, this might be the first time they've had a phone. And so there's a little bit of novelty of actually being able to use a phone to some extent. That kind of quickly dissipates. And then they explore all the other things that school has to offer. And there are our sort of our cage area where we've just had our fire drill today on our sort of nice grassy back field, which students will now go onto. You will see that absolutely packed with boys and girls kicking footballs around and doing other things. So it certainly doesn't switch them off. I think they are actually able to separate the two things. The things you get out of physical sport are different to the things you might get out of gaming, but the two things can go hand in hand. They don't have to compete with each other.
Yeah, I think that's really a relief for a lot of people. I know a concern of parents is theft and damage. How do you address those concerns?
Fortunately, in our area of London, incidents of mobile phones have been incredibly rare, but laptops far, far rarer. Now, these things do happen. Part of the education to students applies equally to carrying things in their bags as it would do to phones. 5+ years ago, before phones were really that prolific, we sort of sending out really stark reminders to students not to walk around the streets with a phone in a pin to their ear, particularly when it starts to get dark and you're illuminated, because phones were high value items that were being stolen. Now, it kind of dropped off a little bit because everybody has got a phone, but the message is still just as important. So just as we'd say, don't advertise the fact that and wave your phone around in public, would say the same thing about carrying a laptop, that it's securely inside your rucksack. When you're traveling, don't get it out on the train or tube, particularly if it's a high value item. Just so there's some educational things about that there always have been about phones. So there is no evidence whatsoever to suggest that there is a higher likelihood of any kind of theft or mugging because you're carrying a laptop. And so that's what we were trying to reassure both parents and students of.
How do you deal with the heavy bag concerns?
One of the things that is often asked is, why have we not now sort of immediately switched over to having electronic textbooks? Do these not exist? And absolutely they exist. And if you as an individual user, you want to download anything onto your electronic device, you can do it in seconds. You, like me, I'm sure you've got 5 different subscriptions to movie and TV platforms, and probably some for your music as well, because you've got one thing on one site and something else on something else. Right. Unfortunately, the same thing exists with these textbooks. So what we're having to do at the moment is to find what's the most not just cost efficient way of doing this, because we're talking about tens of thousands of pounds of investment, and we want to make sure that it is cost efficient, because it's the parents' money that's behind behind this as well. So when we hit the new academic year, we want to be in a position where no student is having to carry a textbook to and from school, because they will have everything that they need available electronically.
Right. Okay, is there anything you'd like to add about this topic of tools, not toys?
I think this last year and the lockdown, I think, has informed our policy on the use of one-to-one devices. It just now will make sense, because I think our reticence prior to that was we don't want a device sitting on a student's desk saying, use me, without sort of productive purpose. And I think what we've now understood is exactly just how productive that can be. And it really is actually focused on collaboration. It's about getting students to work together rather than getting them to all stare blankly at a screen.
And I suppose you're open to changing the policies as and when, and just aware of what's out there and how you need to evolve with the technology.
Exactly. And that's why, this current position is a change of our policy, quite a dramatic change, but it's got a strong reason and rationale behind it. But as you say, even in the future, as things develop, our policy may evolve and certainly will do once again.
Great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Will.
No, thank you too.
It's been really nice talking to you. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Kingston Grammar School podcast. Join us next time when we speak to faculty and students about the transition into sixth form education. Special thanks to our guests in this episode, Stephen Lehek, Sarah Humphrey, and Will Cooper. Thank you also to Allison Williams, Director of Marketing and Admissions at Kingston Grammar School. This has been an Applied Reality production, executive produced by Shannon Vandermark, sound designed by Alex Marcoux.